All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I want to welcome Lori Daly. Lori Daly is president. Let me start by saying that I have the pleasure of serving with Lori on the Disability in DC Metro Advisory Board. So we've known each other for quite some time. But Lori is president of Diversifi Consulting Group, a certified disability-owned business enterprise, a women's business enterprise, and woman-owned small business based in Loudoun County. Diversifi's mission is to bring disability awareness and inclusion to businesses through a series of workshops and seminars designed to meet the specific needs of individuals within the organization. Lori is a member of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Leadership Network trainer and certified disability recruiter, and she's led disability recruiting initiatives, chaired employee resource groups and college committees, and led military recruiting. So she has lots and lots of experience to share with us. So Lori, with that, I will let you take it away, but I just want to say to our participants, so this session is being recorded. Lori's going to go through her presentation. And if you have a question, I don't want you to forget it. So feel free to put it into the Q&A, but we will take questions at the end. And so with that, Lori, thank you for being here.
Thank you. So, and I thank you for that nice introduction. It tells me I've been around a long time. So there is one thing I would love if you all could, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. If you all would put in a chat where you're from and your role. I do recognize a couple of the names that are here. So hi, it's good to see you. But it would be very helpful to know if you're a parent, if you're a provider, if you're a person with a disability. So anything that isn't addressed today, that we can follow up. So thank you all again. And one thing I do want to add is that in addition to being a certified disability recruiter, I also do represent Ability Jobs and an Ability Job Fair. So Ability Jobs is the largest nationwide job board and resume data bank that's dedicated specifically for connecting employers to talented job seekers with disabilities. It's really quite nice. And then in conjunction with that is the Job Fair platform. It is an accessible online platform. It comes screen reader ready. It's real-time captioning, talk to text, and we also have ASL interpreters on standby. And believe me, they are requested during the job fair. I mention this because the next one is March 20th. On the resource page as part of this presentation, the website didn't come in there, but when you receive this presentation tomorrow, I'll make sure that you receive that, because that's another great resource for anyone looking for a job. I mean, there companies there from Warner Brothers to PTO to the UN. So it's worth it. So anyway, again, thank you for this. This is a timely subject. And next slide. And by the way, I'm going to turn my video off for a while because I don't want any issues with the Wi-Fi, but I'll turn it back on when we get to the Q&A. Okay, so next slide. And this is my contact information that you'll have after this session. Next slide. Oh, Diane, can you? Oh, thank you. So this slide, to me, it's always powerful. This is actually the 35th, it's going to be the 35th anniversary. It's amazing, of the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act when it was signed into law. And I love this quote, it's part of the spirit, let the shameful walls of exclusion finally come tumbling down. And I certainly hope that stays true. The ADA, stay on that. Thanks, Dan. The ADA, it's one of the most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation that prohibits discrimination in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, all public and private places that are open to the general public. Now, there have been other milestones of disability. Actually, there's been quite a few, but in addition to the ADA, I want to specifically mention Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That sets a 7% aspirational hiring goal of people with disabilities in the workforce. So if you're a federal contractor or subcontractor, you're going to need to take steps to recruit people with disabilities. It's not a quota, but again, it's a goal. And I want to say, in looking at this, that that's still true. That hasn't gone away. I think what's happening right now is certain words that are part of it, like affirmative action or diversity, may be removed, but this is still a strong law and still in effect. The ADA, the Amendments Act to the ADA, and Section 503, that contractors, people must engage in outreach and recruitment of individuals with disabilities. That's important. So next slide. What this is, to me, everything always comes down to perception. And I do want to mention up front, though, that I'm not a lawyer. So any information that you receive, or opinions, they're my opinions, and they're based on my experiences. They're intended as informational guidance. So I want to make sure about that. So you're going to hear my opinion weave through all of this, and then you can determine for yourselves what where you have questions or not. But I would like you all to think, look at this slide and think of a word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of people with disabilities. This is self-reflective. The whole idea is for you to become aware of the assumptions you have when providing service to people with disabilities. And as part of the disclosure process, to explore your feelings about disabilities and how comfortable you are or not about talking about your disabilities. And this is for you or for one of your clients, because that's a key factor in whether or not you're going to disclose. And in particular, if you can't see the disability, whether your assumptions are good or bad, that really doesn't matter at this point. The goal is just to help you understand that you do in fact hold assumptions and biases. Now, on a personal note, Diversifi CG, it was formed on my experiences and understanding as a person with a disability, which until fairly recently was a non-obvious, invisible disability. Sometimes you hear people say hidden disability. I'm not going to say that because that implies I have something to hide. Let's just say you wouldn't have been able to know what my disability was. And that is no longer true. So that, plus I'm a business owner, I've been a hiring manager, a recruiter. I understand the fears and misperceptions from employers to hire a person with a disability. And as a person with a disability, I can attest to how challenging it is to ask for support, dispel the myths and assumptions and perceptions around that word disability, and feel they have a safe place to ask for help, and most importantly, to disclose. And, remember, disability is all around us. Even if you don't have a disability yourself, you're likely to have family members, friends, neighbors, colleagues with a disability. It's simply part of our human experience. Yet today, there is still hesitation and perceptions that exist around this largest growing diversity population in our country. And I said the word diversity because it is around us despite any race or gender. And I can take that word out now and I'll put in minority, but in my mind, it's still diverse, and that signals strength. So the perceptions and misperceptions, biases, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious, over what a person with a disability can and cannot do and how to interact, has to be addressed. So you could go to the next slide, Diane. People with disabilities, they also represent our largest source of untapped talent in this country. So I think there was another slide I had on the definition of a disability. Is that in your slide deck, or is that after this, Diane? And then I'll go back to this slide. Oh, no, okay. You know what? It must have gotten missed when I sent it to you, but I'll just talk about this a second. So I talk about the ADA, and I'm going to make the assumption many of you on this call already know what constitutes a disability as defined under the ADA, but just to make sure we're all on the same playing level here, an individual with a disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities like walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, working, caring for oneself, or has a record of such an impairment or is regarded as having an impairment, and even if they don't have a disability now, like someone who once had cancer and is now denied a promotion, or a woman applies for a job and she's badly scarred, and the interviewer doesn't give her the job because he or she thinks that customers will be uncomfortable. So all of those elements make for something that's illegal and how you can be protected. Now, in 2008, the ADA Amendments Act greatly expanded this definition by extending major life activities to include the operation of bodily functions like immune systems, normal cell growth, digestive, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, respiratory, circulation, reproductive functions. I mean, there's quite a long list. And neurodiversity is included in this, and that under that umbrella is anxiety, autism, epilepsy, chronic mental health conditions like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression. And it also includes people with episodic or remitting conditions like multiple sclerosis, lupus, diabetes. So the list goes on and on. And when you start to think about it, virtually, it almost seems like almost everyone has some sort of disability. So here we see our community. And if you see someone, again, using a wheelchair or carrying a cane or some type of assisted device, you think, okay, well, this person has a disability. But now with this expanded definition through the Amendments Act, you can't make an assumption about what a disability looks like because oftentimes it's non-apparent, and it's named that way because you can't always see the nature of the disability. In fact, 96% of people who live with chronic medical conditions live with symptoms that are invisible. And if disabilities are non-apparent, people may or may not tell you, probably won't, because, quite honestly, they're afraid. Non-obvious disabilities are arguably the most common type of category, it's the only way I could put it, of disability in the United States. And often the most misunderstood, which leads to a very unique work dynamic when someone, let's say they need an accommodation, but it doesn't look like they need an accommodation. So they're not sure how to ask, how they're going to be received, if they're going to be perceived as someone who's special or lying. So this is where, how does disclosure fit into this whole discussion, and specifically when to disclose, how, why, and to who. And that I wanted to just take, I thought about it and decided to just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit more about my personal background, because about the time when I did not have visible disabilities, and believe me, the symptoms can cause as many limitations as visible ones. So I felt it was appropriate because it's what leads us to the point today. After the ADA, I'm going to go way back in time here. So it was after the ADA, but before the ADA Amendments Act that expanded the definition of disability. So it was before 2008. I was new to the firm I was at. I was in my office, and they were talking about everyone signing up for insurance. And I said, oh, no, that's ridiculous. I don't need it. I never get sick. I was young and what I was thinking. But of course, up until that time, I actually hadn't been sick a day in my life. Well, that week, I ended up having something that felt like a lightning rod going through my body. And I appreciate the heart coming up. Thank you. And I had an attack in the office. And I thought, okay, all right, well, I guess I'm sick. And now I know. And I went to the doctor right away, and it created, I'm just going to put myself on video as I'm telling you this. And it it created really paralysis on my right side. So my doctor thought, oh, well, this could be a tumor on your neck. Can you imagine hearing that? So, and hearing that, I had another attack right there. And they admitted me to the hospital that day and came back with a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. I was completely shocked. I didn't know what it was. I went back to my office. This was a long time ago now. I went back to my office and I was very open about it. I didn't try to hide it. I told people, oh my God, can you believe this? Can you believe this? I mean, I was being my, true self that they call it now and open about everything. Well, the next day, I was called into the office of the owner and president of the company who said, oh, well, we love you, but you have to have long-term insurance because if something happens to you, we're not going to be able to keep you. And, kind of like we love you, but get lost. And I said, well, no, I got defensive. I said, no, if something happens and I can't do my job, you don't have to get rid of me. I'll leave. So couple that now with my visit to my doctor, who also told me that, well, more likely you won't be working after 6 months. You'll be, quote unquote, in a wheelchair. So why don't you just make arrangements now to leave your job? Well, all that did was put fear in me. I was in business development. I had a number of very successful accounts, and using a wheelchair didn't faze me. But thinking my job was going to end and I wouldn't work anymore, that's what fazed me. So I realized both from my work community and from my medical community that I needed to watch what I was saying. That, number one, the medical community was making a judgment about the course of my condition and the impact on my life. And two, my employer was making assumptions about my future. I never disclosed after that. The reality is I lost vision, hearing, mobility, not all at the same time, thank goodness. But I always came up with reasons versus talking about my actual diagnosis. I never asked for something like an accommodation because I was afraid to, and I didn't really even know what an accommodation was. And, that was over 20 years ago? So clearly they were wrong. And that's where the ADA comes in. I never heard of it. I didn't understand it, but I started to learn about this civil rights legislation and its significance and the fact that we have rights under the ADA, and we still do. They haven't gone away. So you fast forward that, and I went to a large Fortune 500 contractor, Northrop Grumman. They were wonderful. And they had something called employee resource groups that in candor here, that those employee resource groups may end up going away with over the next 4 years. But they were supporting at the time communities of interest, and they had one that supported people with disabilities and folks that had family members with disabilities. So I lobbied to get that into my sector and succeeded. So they asked me to speak at the kickoff, which terrified me. I wasn't expecting that. Remember, I never disclosed, but after lobbying hard to make it happen, I knew I had to, and I did, and it was great. And I ended up co-chairing that group and then chairing their community outreach. And it made me realize that I had to empower myself, overcome fears, not allow myself to be, defined by anyone else's perceptions or judgments about what was going to happen to me or define me by my disability. And it helped me to understand the value of forums, the value of us meeting here today to build awareness, to dispel fears and assumption and stigma. There is stigma around that word disability, and to get the word out that we're not limited, that we can reach our goals. And by the way, my first boss that told me, get long-term leave or leave, he was actually a very good man. He didn't mean anything negative. He was talking to me out of care, concern, and he just didn't know. And that's the situation more so than not with people with disability. They really don't know. And that's where we have an opportunity to educate, help ourselves and educate them as well. We've certainly come a long way since the passing of the ADA to make people aware, to embrace a culture of welcoming. But there's a lot more that can be done and that will continue to be done around the world of a disclosure and accommodation awareness. But believe me, there's a lot of choices these days. So thank you for listening to that. But it does color how my thinking too about disclosure. So the next slide, Diane. So the barriers to disclosure. Oh, I better turn off my video. Starting to fade in and out here. So of course, there's people are when given the choice, there is a resistance because they're afraid. They're afraid of being fired or limited opportunities or being considered, special. But remember, in particular for non-obvious invisible disabilities, folks are not obligated, well, for any disability, people are not obligated to disclose that they have a disability unless they are requesting an accommodation. That is a legally protected choice. And again, in addition to some of the fears that are up here, others, there's that fear of the perception and the impact it may have on their job. So for example, there are people out there that may blame a person for their disability if they can't see it and feel that, they're less deserving of accessibility and accommodation. Why does this person get to come in late and I can't? That kind of thing. And generally, employers, some these days have a pretty good understanding of accommodations, but some, especially in particular for those with obvious disabilities, like sensory or mobility disabilities, but there's still less of an understanding around accommodations needed for people with non-obvious disabilities. So I want to plant this seed with you all here. And by the way, there's incredible resources that I'm putting on this. It's the last slide, but everything we're talking about, as well as videos and contact information, and all free, will be available, especially around the whole idea of accommodation and asking for it, because this is where it's important for you above all else to understand the accommodation process, not in general, and also for people you support. And then there's also some extras with this, the bit of the stigma, but you look just fine. I don't understand. But sometimes people with non-obvious disabilities are subject to others questioning the legitimacy of their condition, and they're at the risk for being treated differently. So when a disability doesn't appear to impact their ability to do their job, because again, they can't see anything, others maybe too quickly assume that the person is weak or just a complainer, basically that they're going to blame the person. And also, believe it or not, some of this is coupled with a lack of self-knowledge. I did a presentation and there were folks in the audience that didn't realize that they actually had a disability as defined under the ADA, and they'd never been diagnosed, but they knew something was wrong that in terms of their functioning, but they didn't know what they needed and how to articulate it. But part of this is for you educating yourselves, because that was actually a surprise to me that not everyone that needs an accommodation even knows that they have a disability. So the next slide, Diane. So of course, why disclose? Well, the number one reason to disclose is because you need an accommodation. But I can tell you, in the work that I've done with college students, this was a long time ago, career opportunities for college students with disabilities. There were a lot of reasons why people wanted to disclose. They wanted to disclose because they were working in a supportive environment. They had supervisors that built a culture that supported disclosure. They saw testimonials of employees with disabilities that were progressing in their careers and sharing the support they received from their supervisors and success on their projects. Because so often, part of my reason for never disclosing was because I was progressing in the company and I was convinced that had I disclosed, I don't think that they would have fired me, but I highly doubt that I would have been going on the path that I was going on. And that's what, people want to succeed. They want new opportunities, and they want to see that there's disability awareness and accessibility and inclusion training, that their company is participating in job fairs and job boards. It all shows that it's a safe environment. And that's a critical factor for people, disclosing. So next slide. Oh, by the way, I see here that it says the existence of ERGs on the previous slide. I just want to let you know that I'm not sure that that's going to be around. ERGs seem to be getting flagged as well as anything, in terms of diversity. So I hope that they do stay around. I have to tell you, the ERGs were instrumental for the growth of the companies that I was with, but we'll see. Time will tell. Okay, so disability considerations, the disclosure. So time your disclosure. Honestly, the only time an employer needs to be told about a disability is, again, if you're requesting an accommodation. But be prepared, and this is where I had that first slide on the word disability to look into yourself, to be prepared to discuss any limitations caused by your your disability, and basically understand that some employers will be comfortable, some not, no matter when you disclose. It's all about awareness and the value and impact a person with a disability has to an organization. The timing can change at different stages of the interview process. Basically, if you can disclose when you are in your pre-interview or after you're hired, or you can really disclose at any time you want, and in particular when you do need an accommodation. One thing I didn't mention before, I don't know that this would happen today, but when I was at the colleges talking about disclosure, one of their main reasons, and for these group of people that had definitely had non-obvious disabilities, they wanted to disclose right away because they felt that this is who I am. And if a company is not going to accept me who I am right off the bat, I don't want to be with them. I thought that was great. I'm not so sure that I would promote that today, but that always is an option. You just have to understand if you take that route, what the impact will be. So there are practice scripts that I'm going to show you, and there's also a whole chart on how you disclose and who needs an accommodation and what the impact will be on each step of the way. So let's go to the chart. I think that's the next one. Yeah. So I'm not going to read through each piece of this. This is more for you to have when you get this presentation. Even though it's a little bit older, the chart, it still applies. The advantages and the disadvantages, when to Cheryl, if you wouldn't mind, I'm actually going to be done. I see your question. I'm going to be done in a few minutes. Would you mind holding your question till then? And I just saw your chat. So basically, each step of the way, the advantages, the disadvantages, and also the importance of how you time your disclosure. One thing I do want to mention is that you don't want to wait. It's kind of a little tricky. Once you know who to disclose to, and you look in your company, if there's an employee handbook, or some companies have a centralized recruiting group, or it may just be to your supervisor or your HR. So knowing who to disclose to is key. How to disclose is something that we'll talk about in terms of scripting, but I want to make sure that you know to not disclose too soon. You don't have to give information on your condition, your limitations, until you really need an accommodation, and you're not hiding anything. That's perfectly legal and safe. But I also want to mention to not wait too long to disclose, because sometimes basically you have to be able to, if you're not going to request an accommodation, you need to be able to do the essential requirements of a position with or without an accommodation. If you wait too long and you're already having trouble performing your duties on the job, and somebody writes you up or files a complaint, you're going to need an accommodation, but they're not going to take away the complaint. So you have to be true to yourself and really time things out. So next slide. The next slide. This is, like I said, I'm giving you this chart where you can go through all the advantages and disadvantages. So when you do this, and at the end of this, there are resources where you can actually script out your disclosure. And some of the things that, in terms of doing some homework, for some of you, you've already thought through this, others, maybe the first time, but you want to be able to look at a job or just in general, state the duties that may be potentially difficult for you to perform. This is getting to know yourself. Think about possible accommodations, anything you may have used in the past. And if there's still job duties you can't perform, to research more accommodations. And then imagine meeting with your employer and scripting your disclosure, and most importantly, being able to rehearse. Now, I'm going on and on about accommodations. What if you don't know any of them? That's where I'm going to point you to an incredible resource, which is through the Department of Labor, the Job Accommodation Network, that has all of this on there and more in terms of, and also the scripts. So the next slide. So the scripts, there are samples in I want to just show you this in a book that I call, let me show this. I'm going off video. It's a book that's called The 411 on Disability Disclosure. Now, interestingly enough, I can't always find that online anymore, but it's great. I did have a PDF of it that has all of the rules for disclosure, all the scripts, the whys, and how you can rehearse so that you're comfortable with it. You want to be able to be positive and just talk about it so that it's no big deal, quite frankly. And the suggestions for the script. So what the 411 book is also in your resources, and that's where you'll be encouraged to write about your positive attributes and strengths and any limitations, so that you can clearly go in and say, hey, this is who I am. I want this job, and really be positive and upbeat. That's what it's all about, because that's what employers, at that time, they're your customers, and that's what they listen to. Do you believe in yourself? That's what they want, people that can do the job above and beyond, because the job description isn't going to be pared down just because somebody has a disability. In fact, just the opposite. When somebody with a disability goes online and applies for a job, they have to meet and ideally exceed the essential job requirements with or without an accommodation. And there are so many pluses of hiring people with disabilities. That's been counted over and over again. So that's something to consider. So now on the next slide. Okay, so this, I put this in there. It was a conversation, Diane, that you and I had. There is a difference between self-disclosure and self-identification. Self-disclosure is what we're talking about. It's something personal to you, and it's and private too. Self-identification is when you go and apply for a job, or different periods of time in the company, you're asked to fill out a form, and it's all for statistical purposes and data collection. It's not anything to be afraid of. It's confidential. It goes into a completely, actually all your information after you disclose is confidential. But I happen to be for self-ID, as many of my colleagues are, because it really helps the organization show the makeup and understand the makeup of their employees. They're not by name, but just the numbers with disabilities, and then promote this assignment of more funds to ensure that accommodation requests are handled swiftly and appropriately, and also have more funds allocated to the whole awareness and training. It's actually a good thing, and it satisfies the Section 503 requirement on the 7% hiring goal of people with disabilities, because I predict that is going to stay, and I hope it does, and that there will be audits. Hey, as a company, are you doing what you need to do to hire people with disabilities? That will continue. So we can talk more about that. I think that there is a fear around it, but really because of the confidentiality question. But I haven't seen anything wrong happen with that. Although, interestingly enough, you can't find that form right now on the internet. I think that was pulled temporarily, I believe temporarily, because it had wording in there like affirmative action. So with that said, I'm sure it's going to come back. So the next slide. Okay, so these are the resources I'm talking about. every single one of them has information that you're going to want. The Job Accommodation Network has accommodations suggestions for just about every disability you could ever think of, and YouTube and practice sessions that are online, and tons of information. It's a free service. It's all through the Department of Labor, and same with Ask Earn. Ask Earn is a resource network. People with disabilities has a lot of information on for employers and for employees and for job seekers. In fact, the job board and job fair is in there as one of the recruiting options. And of course, there's others as well. The 411 on disability disclosure, the book I talked about, that is here as a PDF. Other best practices, DC Metro, where Diane and I are both on the advisory board, that has a lot of companies that get together for disability information, and all for the purpose of promoting awareness. So if we have a little time at the end, I'm going to open some of these, but there isn't anything I've said today that you can't find in there, including things that are scripted out and a lot more in the scripting and the workshops. They're just incredible resources. So with that, I think we can open it up to questions. How is that, Diane? Do I have? Yes, who said? I think. Okay, so hi, Lauren. Hi, Cheryl.
So you can, here, let me turn this on. So you can, okay. So feel free, everyone's on mute. So feel free to ask a question, either type it into the chat box or in the Q&A box.
And sometimes it's interesting asking questions during this webinar. My contact information is on, you're going to get these slides tomorrow. I'm going to add a couple more, but my contact information is on it. Feel free to send me an email, give me a call, because there's, I was touching on a lot of areas here. And like I said, that's why I was very careful with the resources, because all of this is in the resource guide. In fact, if we have a few minutes, Diane, with any questions, I'd like to just open up a couple of things just so people can see what I'm talking about, and also
Sure.
open the job board and the job fair, which is coming up. So Cheryl, I think did you have a question or?
There's nothing in the Q&A box at the moment. Oh,
hi, Tracy. So Tracy and I did a presentation together. I think, and I did with a few people here. So we're actually, we're co-workers too in our own way.
So Lori, there is a question in the chat box about
Okay.
Regarding whether her son should reveal his disability before his upcoming interview.
Well, I have a question back. First of all, is it a non-apparent disability? That's one of my questions. And the other one is, can he do the essential? When I say essential requirements of the job, when you look at the job write-up, it says required and preferred. That can he do the required functions of the job he's applying for with or without an accommodation? If he needs an accommodation, he needs to disclose that he doesn't need to get into depth, and that's where some of these practice, and I'll send them to you if you leave me your email, some of these practice scripts come in handy. He doesn't need to disclose what's going on, just that he needs an accommodation to be able to do the interview. But if he doesn't need it, if he thinks he can do the requirements of the job without an accommodation, I wouldn't disclose at that point. He could always disclose when possible. I would disclose after you get the job offer.
There's a question, Anne. I'm going to click on your. I can. I see that you have your hand raised. I can allow you to unmute. Go ahead if you'd like to ask it verbally.
What I was wondering, the 7% of the workforce, is that only for employers who receive federal funds, or is it more than that?
Well, it's for federal contractors and their subcontractors. So, I'm sure that they are receiving, that they have federal contracts, but that 7% applies, it's actually for each group within, each labor category within the organization. And they need to, hit that. Now, it's not a requirement, it's a goal. But at least the way it was last year, the audit, and it is for federal, okay, but an auditor could come in and say, look, we want to see, what are you doing to find people with disabilities? Are you going to a disability job board? Are you doing what kind of hiring? What kind of activities are you doing? But it is for the federal employers. Okay.
Lori, another question. Can you talk a little bit about, this is about the same person going on an upcoming interview. He's been on interviews, hasn't gotten a job offer. Should he go with his job coach on the interview? Pros and cons of that.
I'm going to think, well, I'd have to have, and whoever is asking this question, I'd like to have a separate conversation with you, if you don't mind, because I think that there are different factors with that. I mean, for example, on the job fair that's coming up, the jobs, they don't actually allow a coach that's in there, but I am aware that coaches can go on the job with somebody. If a coach does go on a job with him, then I think you're essentially telling the employer, I need something like this as my accommodation. So at that point, you may want to have that discussion with the employer up front. I'm happy to talk to you more about this offline, but that's my first answer. But I would be happy to talk to you more. And you have my contact information. I think you do, everyone.
Yeah, and I'll send it out to everyone as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you. And then I can, check on, if there's specific things I need to check on, I will for you.
Are there any other questions? Lori, I know you wanted to show some other stuff. So if you want to do that, if people still have questions, they can type them in the chat.
Yeah. Let me just go into, and then I have a video to share because I think it was really cute. The service dog, basically saying everything I said in 2 minutes. But anyway, this, you all hopefully can see this. This is a job accommodation network. And I just picked disclosing a disability before an accommodation is needed. And I want you to just take a look at what they have to say. They have every accommodation under the sun, all the information you need. They have videos, basically people practicing, talking to an employer. The same with I wanted to show you the 411. Oh, here it is. So this, the 411 on disability disclosure. Again, I don't know how much you can find it online, but it is in the resource. And everything that's in there, it's all the scripts, you can see all the scripts, any accommodation, what your rights are, because part of this is you knowing what your rights are and what also legally the employer has to do. And in a way, it's educating them too. Half the time they honestly, they're not trying to be mean. Maybe sometimes they are, but more often than not, I haven't seen that. They just don't know. And disclosure in the job. So you're going to get this workbook and others as well. One of the things you will get in the, when I send this to you, is the Ability Jobs website. This is for the job seeker. This is where you can look at all the job openings, and they are only taking openings and looking at people with disabilities. And I'm telling you, it's incredible, from entry level to executive level. But you'll be able to see some of the companies that are there. Same with the job fair, the career fair. Like I said, there's 6 during the year. They haven't updated this yet, but the next one is March 20th. And you can see just the one we had in December. There's a wide range of the types of employers and what they're looking at. So again, I wanted you to just see what you're getting, because I think it's important. The other thing is,
Lori, excuse me 1 second. I just want to share something that you and I talked about, the job
okay.
fair. Even if you're not really going to take one of those jobs, Lori and I talked about what good experience it is
Yeah.
to go and practice and see what one of those is like.
Oh, definitely. And it's interesting because, there's something about that job fair that fair percentage of people do request a sign language interpreter. So on the screen, there's the recruiter, the job seeker, and the sign language interpreter all going back and forth. And yeah, when you look at that, I would definitely apply. I was always told in my past to interview whenever you can, because if nothing else, even if you don't get the job, it's experience. And a lot of this, part of what I've been saying too, is that you need to become comfortable with yourself, what you need, so that when you start expressing it in the form of a script, yeah, you may write things down, but the more you rehearse it, the more natural it gets. And that's all an employer wants to see. They want to know that you can do the job and that you're positive. Believe me, it's nothing too deep. They want just nice, decent people that can do the job. And so,
Lori, there's a question about what day and time is the location of the job fair.
oh, okay. And I will make sure you get that when you get it tomorrow. But all the job fairs are from 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they run until 5. And I would say probably the most traffic tends to come at 2 o'clock or so, but it doesn't matter. You can come whenever you want. And also the job fairs, they're all virtual. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. They're all virtual. So you sign on, we do request a resume. Think of the word, but it's a wonderful experience. And with that said, if anyone on the call needs to see the job fair, like see a demo of it, I was going to do that today, but we didn't have enough time. I'm happy to do that. I do that all the time, and it's like it wouldn't take long, but it's longer than we have for today. So again, just let me know, and we can, I'll follow up with you. Basically, my big thing in life is employment. I just think that is there a resource for finding employers who receive federal money? Well, basically, I could probably just go through, maybe even do a Google search on federal employers in Northern Virginia. And if they're a federal employer, they're doing business with the government. What's happening in their world right now, I don't know. But I'll see if there's an easier way to find that out, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, that you're asking to make sure that you want to target the ones that really need to reach their 7% aspirational goal of hiring people with disabilities. If I'm making the correct assumption here, but either way, I'll find out. And did you want to run that little video?
Yeah. How long is the video?
It's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me see.
And then we'll end after that. If anybody has
Okay.
a last question, go ahead and type it in.
Okay, so let me see. And yeah, if there's any questions that we didn't hit today or you didn't want to ask then just let me know. Let's see. Okay. I just saw this video online this morning and I thought it was the cutest thing. So let me, and it really said everything I wanted to say in 2 minutes. So that talk about learning to be succinct. So let me just play it for you.
Hello? Scout the service dog here. Today I'd like to talk.
Lori, we lost the sound. It started with sound and then it went away.
Oh, you know what? I think it's because I put myself on mute.
I think so.
Yeah. All right.
About a person's options when disclosing a disability. Determining if and when to disclose a disability can be a difficult decision, especially for those with hidden disabilities, such as brain injury or PTSD, like my friend Daniel here. Someone may consider disclosing a disability when starting a new job, transitioning from school or unemployment, or retaining a job after acquiring a disability. Generally, a person should disclose their disability when they need to request a reasonable accommodation for the workplace. Under the ADA, a person can request an accommodation at any time. This could be during the application process or while employed. An accommodation request may be made even if a disability was not initially disclosed during the application process or after receiving a job offer. A person has no obligation to disclose a disability if it is not affecting job performance, and employers are not allowed to inquire if a person has a disability or medical conditions. Many employers have their own in-house procedures that detail how they handle accommodation requests. This may often be found in an employee handbook. An EEO office or human resources department can assist with disability disclosure and accommodation requests. If that isn't available, a person could talk to a manager or supervisor directly. For an employee, making an accommodation request should be pretty straightforward. Plain English can be used to make a request, and there is no need to mention the ADA or use the phrase reasonable accommodation specifically. Once a disclosure has been made, the interactive process should begin. At this point, the employer can ask for limited information about the disability and the need for accommodations. Information about a person's disability should be kept private. The ADA requires employers keep disability and medical information confidential. Such information should only be given to managers and supervisors on a need-to-know basis. It is important to note that employers do not have to reverse any disciplinary actions that may have occurred before they knew about the disability. Employers are also not obligated to lower performance standards as a reasonable accommodation. Therefore, it is ideal that a person with a disability discloses and requests accommodations before job performance suffers or conduct problems occur. Well, that does it for me, folks. Time to clock out.
Okay. 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 So, like I said, they, that service dogs did a great job. But I do want to first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I want to encourage you to don't hesitate to reach out to me because I think that there's questions that come along the way, and we're just touching on it. Take a look at those resources. They are valuable, but I'm happy to speak with you, and Diane's going to send out the slides, but I'm going to add a few more things really out of all of that, those resource slides. That's important. And also the chart, just to give you an idea of the pluses and minuses of when you're disclosing. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Lori, thank you so much for being here. And as just a reminder, we will send out a link to the recording and with Lori's updated slides. I'll be doing that tomorrow.
And somebody just asked for my contact information. That's on the slides that you're going to get tomorrow.